And
Hey,
we are back live with the 2021 Modern Home Tour with tour sponsor J. Christopher Architecture, Chris Davenport, architect over there. Chris, thank you so much for your support this year. This is, man, it's been a year for all of us, right? And we're grateful to have you here. It's your first time on our tour. Ken, why don't you take it away?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, we pushed back a couple minutes to make sure that everybody was all set and in. We have our next segment is with J. Christopher Architecture and team. This one is a little different. For client privacy reasons, we were actually not given access to a 3D scan. However, Chris and his team have a really great home to showcase through lots of photos, and we have a really good story about the design and the build itself to share. As I mentioned in the last segment, all these homes come together as a result of a team effort. Everybody will tell you that everybody in the home and design building profession will tell you that what they do is just not possible without an amazing team. J. Christopher Architecture are no exception. They strongly value a team approach to building and design. In fact, one of their principles, or I guess you say mantra, is that design is much more than just aesthetics. Houses should also be beautiful in their efficiency, their health, and resiliency. So to talk about this project and walk us through, we have Chris Davenport, AIA. He is the principal architect and the namesake of J. Christopher Architecture. And with us at the beginning here, builder Carl Lane. He is with Voltaire, and a little bit later, Brian Johnson from Backbeat Structural Design, the structural engineer, is going to come in and talk about the project as well and share his story. So what everybody should know is that both Carl and Brian, Voltaire and Backbeat Structural Design, were involved in the project from the very beginning with Chris and his team. Everybody has a lot to talk about, and I've rambled long enough, so I am going to turn it over to Chris and say, Chris, please tell us a little bit about this project and go ahead and set the stage.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken and Jamie. Thank you for this opportunity just to be a part of the tour. You did a great job of introducing kind of what J. Christopher Architecture is all about. I'm in this business to kind of serve people through the stage of architectural design, and I do that by forming a really good team up front. And while I can be dangerous in each category, I am definitely not an expert in every single thing there is to know. So I hire people like Carl and Brian and really good folks to kind of come alongside me and be experts in their various industries. And I like to form that team up front, as you mentioned, so that we can have a good process from the get-go and use everybody's expertise. So Carl, do you want to take just a second maybe and just talk about Voltaire and just a brief intro?
Sure. Voltaire LLC is located in Horseshoe Bay. We are located right beside the Escondido Golf Club in Horseshoe Bay, and we were part of the development team that developed and built out Escondido, and are currently builders there in the community. We also do Horseshoe Bay West and generally the hill country type of settings for custom homes, ranch projects, commercial projects, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the great things about those guys is they have a lot of development experience as well. So on these large ranch projects, they can bring an offering to the table, which is really helpful for us as architects. So,
well, on a project like this, it's not just the house, right? It's the acreage and the utilities and all that stuff. That this is not just a regular home to build, obviously.
Absolutely. You'll actually see some fun videos here a little bit later where we sourced a bunch of rock from the property. It's a large acreage, and so we were able to source the rock on site and blow it up with some dynamite, and it's really fun.
Stuff up. Everybody loves it.
Everybody loves blowing stuff up. Absolutely. So the project is, as you mentioned, I can't disclose the location or the clientele, but it's basically a 1,700 acre ranch in the Texas Hill Country. The project is about 8,200 square feet, and what you're showing now is just kind of the starting point where it all happened. Eventually, the project kind of totaled about a $7.3 million budget, so a pretty sizable budget. But this is where it all started. This little fire pit, these tree stumps were kind of where we had our initial meeting. And
Really?
it didn't take me long to figure out what we were doing with the project, because they had already built this little cliffside perch kind of hanging over the edge of the cliff. And so when we were out there talking about what their dreams and visions for the home, it was pretty clear that really what they wanted to do most was to just kind of embrace this cliff edge and focus on the natural beauty that was already there on the property. And you can see it's fairly dramatic. There's a pretty good fall. What you're pointing at now is we kind of called that the Serengeti, was kind of the pet name on the project.
Wow.
But essentially there was this really nice clearing on the other side of the cliff across the creek, where you can see all of the wildlife that he's got on the property will wander through there, and you can actually see them from the house and from the decks.
Wow.
So that was clearly kind of the design intent, and the initial thrust of what to do for this project was absolutely all about embracing the cliff. And of course there were other parameters, but this is kind of where it all started. You can see there's actually a little bit of a waterfall down there, kind of a man-made waterfall in the creek. And that created a lot of noise, so we wanted to feature that on the decks as well. So we have a lot of decks kind of facing the rear that you can actually pick up the noise from below. So beautiful piece of property, just a blessing to be able to work on this project. Every time I went out to the site, it was an absolute joy just being with Carl and hanging out, and I'd spend as much time as I could there, because it's kind of like getting to go on vacation.
Yeah, I can believe it. That's amazing. So how a challenging property, beautiful but challenging. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, so obviously with a cliffside perch like that, you have a few challenges that come along. One of those challenges is simply if you're along the cliff edge, how do you structurally handle that? Brian Johnson with Backbeat will come in and tell us about that a little more later. But in a nutshell, the strategy was to kind of hang about 10 feet back from the cliff, reinforce our foundation, but then use large cantilevered forms to kind of hold out the decks over the cliffside. So the feeling when you're on the decks and when you're on kind of the edges of the home is that you're actually hanging over the cliff. The reality is our ground's a little more stable than that. I don't know. Did you have any other comments on that, Carl?
The geotech engineering and the soil stabilization studies were good money spent there to verify that we did have solid structure. So that close to the cliff, it can be dicey, but we spent the money up front, and it paid off well.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing we did that was kind of specific to this site, and Carl will talk about this in a minute about kind of the rock that we encountered, but there was a very substantial amount of native limestone bedrock, which had a very high percentage of dolomite, as he just mentioned. And so that was a challenge. And so with the design, we decided to do multiple buildings that kind of step down the hillside, eventually culminating in this kind of view that you see here on the back, where the house really embraces the cliff. But on the front of the home, it actually kind of steps up a hillside. And the idea was the least we could do to kind of cut into those hillside edges, the better. If we could stay out of the rock, it was going to be less expensive and just kind of made sense. Obviously, when you're doing ranch design, durable materials and systems were really important. We went with a one-story design, which is often the case with ranch architecture because we typically have larger sites. When we're doing infill in the city, you're kind of forced to go up because of the nature of the small lots. But on a ranch, you can spread out, and it kind of tends to make the house feel like it's growing out of the earth. Tends to make it kind of relate to the nature better. And so we really like to do that where we can.
Tell you what, I love this picture. This became the cover picture for the entire tour this year, by the way. This was
Thank you
for the tour. I love this. To me, this is Texas Hill Country. This is everything great about it in one image. It's a gorgeous, sunset, great evening. The water's there, the native landscape's there, and this house is just built into it. It takes advantage of it, but it's not dominating it. It's just part of the landscape, and it's so hill country, and I love it so much.
Yeah, so I really thank you for that. I appreciate that, and that was absolutely the goal, is to try to create a home that really felt like it just kind of grew out of the land. And you can see, the edges are very rough here. That you can see we didn't do any landscaping on the back there, other than Carl spent probably some precarious hours clearing out some of the brush and trees for view. But short of that, the rear of the home is completely natural, and quite honestly, most of the front of the lot is also natural. There's a small area of turf that you'll see in the photos in a little bit, but
Yes.
not much. So, Carl, do you want to talk about the challenges with the rock?
Yes, we try to take advantage of the natural terrain, and we step down the foundation to eliminate or reduce the amount of intrusion. But using the proper type of subcontractor who's well-versed, has brand new fresh equipment was critical, has the ability to stage and man a job like this was critical. So that was a very expensive upfront cost, but we were getting into, F-350 chunks of rock that weighed, over 15,000 pounds a piece.
Oh my God.
We were breaking brand new equipment the first day it was coming out by breaking that rock. So it was pretty tough. We had 3 breakers on a 50,000 pound excavator, and the first one broke before lunch on the first day.
Oh my goodness.
We rebuilt the 3 breakers, and we're cycling them out every week. And we did that straight for about 6 weeks.
Ken, I think you've got some photos you can show of
We do.
like a Volkswagen-sized chunk of rock there, and
We do. I want to run real quick before I do that. I want to run just my favorite view of this, just the pool and the balcony situated over the hill country, and I love that. I love the chimes there. I love the pool underneath there. And the pool really takes advantage of the landscape as well.
The setting is amazing.
Yeah.
yeah, and there you can kind of see just the general layout, how it did kind of sprawl across the land. It was very much about creating multiple buildings and kind of one of the things in ranch architecture that's really nice to do is to reference the historic actuality of ranches, which is there are a bunch of utilitarian buildings that are kind of spread out all over the property. So when designing a home, I try to kind of recreate and mimic that look where the buildings are broken up into individual sections and maybe connected by breezeways and glass bridges, etc.
The house
anyway,
becomes like a campus when you do it like that. You have separate buildings.
Exactly.
I think that's great. And you can almost tell in one of those shots of the back, like of the house on the cliff, you can almost see it. It is one complete house, but you can almost see, okay, well, this area here, this area, I like that. I like that. It's a really neat. It's one of the things that you can do with a ranch house that I don't think you can really do with any other style of house.
Yeah, particularly not in urban infill, which is a lot of what we see these days.
Yeah.
So okay, let's get some fun.
Shall we go, boom?
Yeah, let's do it. Carl, the first thing you got to do before you break into it, what happens first here?
Well, in our initial takeoffs, we determined we'd need about 20,000 tons of base just for the foundation. And we started running the numbers, and we were heading towards $1 million worth of imported materials. So I got together with our site work guy, and we decided, hey, why don't we process on site? And we set up our own crushing facility and made our own road base and base material for the foundation.
All right.
So this is 45,000 tons being brought out of the earth for processing.
Well, let's see what that looks like. The anticipation's killing me. Oh, wow.
Now I got to ask: were there neighbors in earshot that you warned and said, "Hey, you're going to hear something later"?
There was a county commissioner. We gave him a heads up. He was about 3 miles away.
Yeah.
That's a 1,000-yard view right there.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's cool.
1,000 yards away. Wow.
And now, how much material was there? Was used to blow that out? Wow.
It's got 27,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate.
Nice.
Everybody laugh. That's great. That's crazy. That's crazy. And this is what was there afterward, I guess.
That's the boring holes we put in the ground and create the grid in which we would blow up. So those are about 40 feet deep, 3-inch holes, and then they came and filled them full of the ammonium nitrate.
Wow.
Oh, that's a good perspective shot of how deep that hole is.
And that's full of the material. We end up digging that out. It turned out to be a quarry in there.
Another thing to point out on that photo, guys,
sorry.
there you can see that's basically the soil conditions for the whole site. So we were just on rock upon rock upon rock.
Wow.
Just amazingly solid foundation.
And Carl, you said how much equipment did you go through in just a day out here when you got the first time?
The very first day they brought a brand new Caterpillar breaker out, and by lunchtime we'd already destroyed it. So they had to rebuild 3 pieces of equipment constantly to keep the breaker running.
Is that the guy right there?
No, that's the small equipment. That was digging the pool area out.
Got it. Okay, that's the small stuff for this. Got it. I mean,
those are little rocks.
Yeah, here in town we just dig out a little kit with little little caterpillars that are like little one-man things, and that's all it takes. But that's some machinery right there.
Well,
So-
we've got. I know you guys want to get into like looking at some of the house photos and kind of the design concept. We'll hear more from Carl later, so stick around. And I'll also have Brian Johnson, my engineer, joining us to kind of talk about some of the other challenges we had. But I want to kind of walk you guys through the house and show you some of the exciting things that kind of came out of the design concept.
Yeah, I am very interested. And now that I've seen, I know, how you did it. I want to see some of the main features of the home, the pretty stuff.
Yeah, so the client wanted a kind of a simplistic modern aesthetic, which is obviously what the Austin Modern Homes Tour is all about. But the thing that was really key to them is they really wanted the house to feel homey, welcoming. It was meant to be a place where guests and family could come and really relax. This is not a home that's meant to be a show home. It's not necessarily for large entertaining groups. They do sometimes have people on the property, but they have other buildings that they might house them in. So this was really meant to be for intimate friends and family. If someone's coming to this house, they know the client intimately. So warm, intimate, inviting, homey, welcoming, those were the kind of words that were thrown around in the design process.
Okay.
And then they also, aesthetically, they wanted an exterior that kind of felt like it belonged to the property, that wasn't trying to stand out so much as just become part of the land. They did also have a couple of travels to Africa in their lifetime. And so you'll see in the interiors, the interior designer really played off of that a lot. There's some African themes that kind of happen that you'll take note of. One of the things that we did to kind of create these warm, inviting spaces was just be really careful with proportions. Cozy spaces often offset the large rooms. So you can see kind of the large great room area with the dining table, a fairly sizable room, although we did keep the ceiling at about 13.5 feet, so it wasn't too oversized. But you can see to the right there's smaller rooms that are flanking those, the breezeway, a little snug area with a nice little sitting table. And so the challenge there is, how do we create spaces that both feel, kind of like a cozy, snuggle up, read the paper space, but then also have rooms that are large enough when you do have a couple of families over that everybody can kind of be together in one space. And that certainly happens on ranches a lot. A lot of times you're bringing people out to the ranch and you need kind of a lot of dining area. And in the case of my particular client, the kitchen became incredibly important. I don't think the photo's here, but we'll talk about that more later. One of the things you'll note is exterior materials tend to come right from the outside to the inside. So you can see the stone coming through the window there. You can see the wood beams actually extending through the windows and going to the outside. The soffit is continuous. Those are fairly difficult details to accomplish. It takes a good builder like Carl to be able to execute that well. But what it does is it really blurs the line between inside and out. And it really helps to kind of warm up the walls. It makes the house feel more native to the site. And just generally stone and wood and those types of materials tend to feel warmer than just a blank wall. And so we very much use that as a strategy throughout the home. You'll see floor to ceiling windows everywhere, kind of connecting the inside to the out. Let's see. So another thing you might notice is material-wise, we had actually the opportunity to do a lot of really fun stuff. While the stone is kind of native Texas limestone, you can see some large blocks of it that we use for landscaping. The wood is kind of a Louisiana cypress, which is a kind of naturally bug-resistant and holds up well. It's a durable wood that holds up well to the weather and moisture and those types of things. Douglas fir and soffits on the soffits were kind of throughout, and that warms up the ceilings, and it also brings the ceilings down, kind of makes them feel like they're closer so the spaces don't feel too lofty. And then exterior beams throughout are that same Doug fir, and you'll see that they just kind of, they're an important part of the language on the outside of the home, and then they're also an important part of the language on the inside of the home. And so it kind of creates a unity between the two, where you're just constantly bridging that gap. And that was the goal for the project.
So should we head inside, or at least
Sure. Let's head inside. Well, and actually we're still outside, but it's sort of inside.
We're in the breezeway right now.
Yeah. So this is actually a good place to talk about what I was just saying. So this kind of indoor-outdoor connectivity, one of the things you get to do on a ranch with this extra land is I can create an entry sequence. So one of the interesting things about this home is there is no front door on this house. It doesn't need one. There's no street to have a front door. So what we do instead is we kind of create a drama or a series of events that happen from coming onto the property, getting out of the car, getting out of the car, stepping into maybe a covered breezeway. Then is there kind of a walkway? So there you're seeing the walkway that actually eventually leads to the door, which goes in the home to the left. But it really wasn't about a presentation of a front door. It's more about an experience on your way in.
So here's
Was
that.
there, I got a question. As we kind of walk through the inside and just look in general, did the client use an interior designer?
Yeah.
Was this their idea, or yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So Brad Alford with Bradley Alford Designs, he actually had been in touch with the client on previous projects. And so they hand selected him and brought him on. And he had a little bit of knowledge about their history and likes and dislikes. And so one of the things I would say that stands out, especially on the interior photos, is you'll see there's a pretty wide use of color. And that was very specific to the client. They were drawing out some of those African themes, and they just tend to enjoy color. So we introduced
oranges and browns and like darker browns. And,
Yeah, and he did a very good job of still staying with kind of earthy tones, which I thought was nice. And then we kind of collaborated, of course, on the walls, ceilings, anything that was kind of architectural in nature. But Bradley was a great help. He helped us kind of evaluate stain colors, and as I mentioned earlier, interior designers are experts in kind of color and fit and finish and all of those things that, while I know a little bit about, I'm not in those day in and day out like I am architecture. So it was really nice to have him on board. Unfortunately, in this particular case, we weren't able to get Brad on board until a little bit later in the process. Ideally, I like to have my whole team assembled right from schematic design.
Right.
And now we're back at the pool again, the ledge. Still love this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's actually me up there, by the way. Just truth be told, we needed a scale figure, so I volunteered.
Yeah, that shows amazing scale.
Yeah,
this is cool. I love the night view.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that was strangely, this one really kind of surprised me as we were laying out the schematics for the house. While we had such a huge property, the site that we had chosen, the house is quite large in footprint, but I still really didn't have room to do a pool behind the home in a traditional manner. And also it didn't really make sense with the cliff. It kind of posed some challenges. So early on in the design process, I came up with the idea of actually intersecting the home with the pool. And one of the nice things this does is it actually ties the front entry court that's part of that experience that you kind of walking through the breezeways on the way to the door. It ties that courtyard with the courtyard in the back that is kind of the poolscape that has the sun deck and the hot tub and is kind of overlooking the cliff edge. So that concept ended up proving to be very successful. And I think the lap pool is actually kind of I think it was about a collegiate level lap pool. So it's not Olympic, but it's actually a very functional pool for that.
We have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The exterior stone,
yes,
on all the walls, is that what you guys pulled out of the earth?
No, no. So the stuff we pulled out of the earth was used for landscaping, used for road base, as Carl mentioned. Basically anything with rough stonework.
So where did these like all that exterior stone for the wall?
Yeah, so it's a Texas limestone from a native quarry, from a nearby quarry. So.
Okay. All right, let's head inside for real now.
Okay, for real. Yeah, I think the photos jump around a little bit, so
it's all right.
My apologies for that.
it's a big property and a lot to see, and it's really lovely. So that's not a problem at all. So here we are back in the kitchen, the heart of every home.
Yeah, so maybe talking about this, just a lay of the land type of thing here. Off to the right is kind of a breakfast bar space. Off to the left is actually a service window to another kitchen, which is a catering kitchen. Functionality-wise, I had a husband and wife team that both cook, and are both very much interested in cooking. And then also they might from time to time bring in a caterer. So there was actually a possibility that we might have 3 different parties working on preparation of food at the same time. So you can see we used a very large oversized island so that people could be in the kitchen while they're entertaining. We have that kind of back of house catering kitchen to the left, which actually even has kind of a receiving area similar to a restaurant. So we've actually got a private deck behind that catering kitchen where they could deliver food in the middle of an event and nobody would ever see. So that's kind of a nice feature.
Yeah.
You can see the materials are beautiful in here. There's a lot of natural, nice wood tones and just gorgeous, and just the right amount of kind of wildlife presentation, I feel like. And so really happy with this space. You can see the clear story light too coming in. That was a big factor throughout the home, is making sure that we had daylighting everywhere, because I think it ultimately kind of couples with that warm, welcoming feeling. Natural light just can't really be beat. And we were also lucky in that the cliff edge kind of basically faced north. So we weren't dealing with heat gain on that side. So we were able to really do a lot of windows over there.
Yeah, those windows really bring in a lot of light to that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you can tell how well lit it is.
This is I love this.
Yeah, it's a stellar space. It's actually just the connector between the master wing, which is completely private, and the rest of the home. And so we wanted to give a sense of, as you're experiencing these spaces, that once you go beyond this point, you're in a different place. And the homeowner was very much interested in kind of a retreat, whether it be when they're entertaining, that they could get away and kind of hide out in the master bedroom, or even just in general, just kind of that sense of retreat and being in a different part of the home. There's a private deck off to the left there that those doors go to that's completely independent of the other decks that are on the home. So in the event that they did have company, they could sit out there and enjoy a cup of coffee or read the paper in the morning and not feel like they have to entertain yet.
Bedroom master bath is stunning.
Yeah, and again, you can see the use of the clear story light, lots of windows. Beauty of being on a nearly 2,000 acre property is we don't have to worry about covering the windows.
Yep. Let's pop back outside for a second, talk about the lighting. Because we're going to get back into Carl's participation here in just a second, but let's head back out and talk about how this home is lit at night and at twilight, and that really bring out the features of the home.
Yeah, so I've used this strategy before, and I got to give a shout out to Deborah Frankhauser, who's a lighting designer that I use a lot. She had actually consulted on this project as well. But the idea is kind of this lantern box effect. So we do have some lights that are going to warm the exterior materials, like the copper and the wood and those. But a lot of it's about creating kind of a glow on the inside, which shines through the windows at night. And it really does create a very dramatic effect of kind of like a life-size building lantern.
All right. So, and that takes us back into really sort of the way that the home is situated and the site itself back here. And this is back to the beginning.
Yeah, so this is kind of this is where Carl started the journey of building. You can see the loose rocks kind of falling off the cliff edge. That's what we didn't want to happen to the house. So there was some effort put forth there. You want to talk a little bit about kind of the preparation? I think Brian's going to be joining us here real quickly, Carl, and we'll probably have you hop off and have Brian hop on. So if you want to, if any highlights you want to share, now is the time probably.
I think we've covered most of it, but basically, we just had to use a grid line system, on-site surveying, and be very precise at where we went into the cliff edge here. For example, we went down about 12 feet in some areas right there, and
wow,
basically didn't get close to the edge as much as possible.
Some work in progress. There's a lot of earth being moved through this project, huh?
quite a bit for sure.
When you were building, how did you decide on the placement and the relationships of the multiple buildings and how they would tie together? And
so you're absolutely, you're thumbing through something that I do on almost every project is, when you go out to the lay of the land, typically the trees kind of tell a story. Sometimes they're so heavily wooded that you kind of have to clear them first. But in this case, there were just a few feature trees that were on the property. So I don't know if you can back up maybe 2 or 3 photos there.
Yep.
Okay, one more forward.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go. So you can see there was a natural clearing into the build area. So that became where our road came down the hill. And then you can see the feature tree on the left there. It's a large live oak. And then one more maybe. And then there's the live oak. And it's like, well, that's such a prominent fixture in this landscape. How can we feature that? So I actually designed the turnaround to encircle that tree. And so if you go one more, it becomes part of the entry sequence.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That tree very much becomes part of the architecture, again, kind of playing to the theme that the building is sort of growing from the land which it's sitting on.
How hard is it to design around that to be sure that tree is preserved in this whole long production process of the home?
Sure. So maybe Carl, you can speak to that a little bit, but one thing I will tell you is there's kind of the rule of half critical root zone. So basically about half of what the tree's roots are, you want to make sure you don't do anything inside that. Ideally, if you can get out to kind of where the canopy is and not disturb anything inside the canopy, then you're in great shape. And then Carl, I think on your end, you had to do some protections probably throughout the process, right?
Correct. We went all the way to the drip line, and then I manned with fencing, and I kept everybody out of there and very low traffic during the process.
Yeah, we've actually got an image here that talks about, so this was cantilevered here specifically because of that root zone, correctly?
Exactly. Yeah, and you can see again how we've been sensitive with the architecture to kind of weave in and out of the trees rather than removing the trees and just plopping the house down on the land. So,
okay, Carl, I want to thank you for joining us. The background, we're not generally privileged to sort of hear the construction story. It's really interesting, especially the project of this magnitude. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and we should have Brian coming in here in just a moment.
Oh, you know what? Poor Carl. One of the things you can also see in this photo that I wanted to mention is there was a natural drainage swale on the property that was a function of just large amounts of rainfall that would fall here, and they'd all be on kind of one side of the property, and it actually had eroded out a rock bed. And so what we did, rather than try to fight that, we actually used that swale, reinforced it with concrete, and that was Carl's idea, to actually reinforce it with concrete, and then we covered it up with stones again. So if I think 1 or 2 more photos here,
right,
finished result,
right there,
but yeah, right there. So you can kind of see to the side of that wall, that's the reinforced rock bed that now looks still completely natural, but it's very much serving a purpose to deal with the drainage on the property.
Yeah.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, how are y'all?
So Brian Johnson, who I had mentioned before, the company is Voltaire. He was the structural engineer and can talk about specifically some of the challenges when building. For those watching that aren't in the profession, the structural engineer is, and this is not a pun, but is the bridge between the architect and the builder. Architect has a beautiful design. Builder knows how to implement that design, but is that design going to be safe? Are the things that that are in the design going to translate well into the build? That is a structural engineer's job, is to make sure that that the two work together cohesively. A very, very big part of any home or building, any building team.
Yeah, one thing I would mention, so Brian, with Backbeat, I got them involved very early in the project.
Oh, sorry, Backbeat, yeah, my bad.
I knew I was going to have, kind of large cantilever concepts. I knew we were going to have some anchoring challenges with the cliffside. And so Brian was actually one of the first calls that I made after kind of getting into the design, so that we could really discuss strategies for how to deal with, all of the cantilevers, the large roof overhangs on a cliffside has a lot of wind. That was a concern. So Brian, I'll let you jump in, maybe talk, just briefly about your company and kind of some of the challenges that you saw on the project.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm Brian, principal at Backbeat Structural Design. We really kind of focus on trying to work with the architect, work with the owner on how we integrate the structure meaningfully into the aesthetic and also meet the functional requirements of life safety and so forth. And so working with Chris, really being able to participate at the beginning of the project kind of allowed us to figure out some of these things, like we're going to have some larger cantilevers, we're at the edge of the cliff, what do we need to do in terms of structure to support that? And I think what I like to try to do in working with an architect like Chris is understand what their kind of goal is for the space, and understand at an early stage kind of what kind of proportions, what kind of materials they're interested in using. That way we can be sensitive to the architecture moving forward in the design itself.
Yeah, I can imagine that, especially on a project like this, that is so spread out and has so many. You're building up next to a cliff. There are a lot of ideas that go into this that it seemingly would be absolutely impossible to sort of, as a second thought, bring a structural engineer in. I mean, this is probably one of the greatest examples I've seen of, like, no, he needs to be in from the beginning.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. When you think about some of the kind of that dramatic cliff edge and the cantilever, and really trying to express that, and as the homeowner or as a guest, walking out there and just kind of experiencing what that feel is, looking at the cantilevers, trying to understand what proportions we're trying to match as well from a depth of structure perspective. When you think a little bit about the details, especially like at the roof line, where you've got these windows kind of coming up, some of them poke up even between the beams, the rafters that poke out. And so looking at the detailing, how do we fit and make that connection between a column and the rafter, so that we're expressing what we need to, Chris wants to express there, without a bunch of bolts and fasteners and stuff like that kind of cluttering the design up. And so really looking at, how do you create a really elegant splice or connection there between those two that works with the architecture. So
I think if you guys skip ahead about 8 or 10 photos, there's photos that kind of highlight what he's talking about.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get there in just a second. I do want to let everybody know, typically our sessions stop at 11:45. We're going to keep on going if you guys can stay with us for a little longer. We got lunch break coming up. If you guys got to take some lunch, audience, take some lunch, grab a bite, come back, keep watching. But we're going to keep going as long as we Chris and Brian keep going.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no worries. Here, we'll come through here. More construction pictures.
This is more about plumbing and drainage and just how that was an endeavor on such a large project.
How many feet of PVC would you say are used in a project like this?
Gosh, I have no idea. But I almost put a photo in there. There's a guy in the hot tub, and he's encircled by about 7 layers high of PVC pipe. It's going every which way but loose. I mean, it's just that's actually kind of a neat detail we incorporated. And again, Brian had to be involved with this as well, because we cut into our concrete slabs with a recessed floor drain on the exterior porches. So because the house sits up on the cliffside, it gets a lot of wind-blown rain, and we wanted to make sure that wind-blown rain wasn't going to come into our 20-foot wide pocketing door assemblies. And so we actually put recessed drains in the floors all around those door openings. So that had to be thought through depth-wise, and Brian had to do a special detail where the rebar was in and around the floor system around those drains. How are we going to handle that? You can see the drains there on the walls.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's really smart.
And then here you can just get a sense of kind of these cantilevers that Brian's talking about.
Yep. Another beautiful picture of the area down there. I love the levels in this house. It's so many places in this house that they just all come together, and it's just such a great design.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's functional in nature too. Here's another one of those spaces. Because we elevated the floors, we were able to put the rainwater tanks all the mechanical equipment, everything was kind of under this floor roof. And that allowed our equipment to be more efficient, protected from the weather, easier access for the homeowner. So when they're away from the ranch or they need somebody to come out on site, they don't actually have to go into the home. They can get to the mechanicals without that. So
I think this is also an example of Chris really taking advantage of the step site, the slope site, where we're trying to minimize the excavation to minimize the cost. But it hides those rainwater collection tanks, but also it just helps us. This is the backspan of the cantilever that goes out over the porch, and the longer the backspan that we can make, the more efficient that cantilever is going to be. And so this was, you think about design as kind of interweaving all these different criteria together, and I think this is an example of the team working together to really affect a good design that's functional as well as aesthetically pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
In my notes here, you mentioned something called a rat slab with this image. Tell us about a rat slab.
Yeah, so rat slab is actually just basically like a 3-inch slab. Typically, a residential slab would be 5 to 6 inches or so.
Okay.
A rat slab is just a small slab that's really poured for the purpose of keeping bugs and critters out. It's not really for structural reinforcement on the foundation. But what that allowed us to do is to use these spaces for various things and not worry about the outside getting in. So, the homeowner could put storage down here. It wouldn't be climatized storage, but you could put some, outdoor chairs, things like that, and have it protected.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now here we go.
Yeah. So
Brian's handiwork there.
Yeah.
This house is full of cantilevers, right?
Yeah.
Full of cantilevers, absolutely. So there's some foundation walls, concrete that kind of step up to pick up those cantilevers. We're thankful to have really competent limestone there, all the way towards the face of the cliff, and so having structural steel in these particular locations. We wanted a stone floor. So structural steel and concrete really made a lot of sense given the weight, the type of occupancy loading, if you have big parties or anything like that out there. So really kind of working that into the design. And that's actually that same area where those tanks would go below.
I was going to ask that. That's like that last photo we saw, but everything hasn't been closed up yet.
That's right. Exactly.
Right. What is the depth of that overhang? What is the length of that cantilever? Like how far is that?
I believe it's around.
That's our 15. I'm sorry. Do you know, Brian? It's 15 feet.
It's 12, 15 feet. Yeah.
Wow. It's pretty big.
It's pretty big. Yeah. So, we looking at the design of the steel, kind of what the spacing is, what the module is, what are the proportions, and kind of working with Chris on trying to make sure that we got the right proportions for the steel, so that wherever you're looking at it, it looks right and it looks competent as well.
So obviously, cantilevers are a pretty fundamental part of a lot of modern design. And we see them on our tours a lot. Everybody always thinks they're cool. Can you give us and our tour goers just sort of a general, maybe a 30-second, really high-level overview of how cantilevers work and what you have to work on to make them work, so they don't basically fall off the house?
Sure. Well, at the edge of the cantilever, is where, if you stand there, put a load there, what's going to happen is it's trying to be like a little seesaw. So you put something on one end, it's going to push it down. It's going to try to pull the other end up. And so at that other end, we need to make sure that there's enough weight on it so it naturally stays in place. Or if there is a tension load, that we're able to strap it down and not let it go anywhere. So you're really looking at trying to make sure, A, you don't have a kind of an overturning failure. And then B, you're also looking at just it gets complex with deflections to make sure that, because on a cantilever is where you're going to be able to see deflections most. A lot of times in other places, they're kind of hidden. So, making sure that it doesn't look like it's sagging, or that the natural deflection that is going to occur does not affect the finishes or anything else above it or below it. So those are some of the challenges that we face in particular with the cantilevers.
And what the counter in this place, the counterweight is what? Just the house, the building, the material above it?
It's the slab, it's the finishes. On the back end, there's a lot of wall and roof that bear down right at the end of where those beams land. And so all of that together is the counterweight for what's at the end of the cantilever. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for the detour. It's a question I've always had about how things like that work.
No problem.
All right, so we're going to head.
Especially, and this is a really great example to showcase it too in a house where there are so many and they are so big. A lot of modern homes will have a cantilever of a couple feet, few feet, just that little bit of overhang. But these are huge. This is everybody saw a photo of Chris standing on the edge and looking down. I mean, the whole the outside spaces of this, when you're standing on the back, there are so many places where you can go and stand and you feel like you're flying over a cliff. Absolutely. Really. So to get that length out is really an incredible feat of structural engineering, which again is why Brian and Backbeat need to be involved from the very beginning. This is not the type of project where you can design, start building and be like, well, I'll have a structural engineer just kind of run his eyes over it. No, too much going on. They got to be involved from the beginning of this. This is such a great example of those three elements needing to come together to create this.
Mm-hmm.
So in a home this size, obviously lots of other challenges too. What, Chris, what else were you dealing with to create this project and to get it into the finished state that we see it today?
Yeah, so there in framing, certainly there were a couple of, I would say there's one detail in particular that was the most difficult to accomplish. We got a few photos of that, but it's essentially where the beams intersect the windows. Those beams are partially structural. They are running through those windows, and because the client wanted a 20-foot wide pocketing door that disappeared, you can see there's nowhere to structurally support the beams that are holding up the roof. And so we had to put an interstitial beam between the doors below and the clear story above. And then as those beams intersect the windows, we had to put in little steel studs rather than conventional wood construction. And so this was all Brian, we kind of worked with Brian to kind of figure out how that detail worked. And then we wanted to keep it as minimal as possible in terms of the width so that it didn't look like anything more than a window. We eventually wrapped that piece of gray steel that you see there with the same material that's around the windows, so it looks cohesive as the windows are there. Do you have anything to add to that, Brian?
No, this is I think an important part of that of really trying to respect the goal of the owner in terms of the aesthetic, as well as all the things that the architect is thinking about. So when you look at a detail like this, trying to get the column as small as you can to minimize that volume at the window with all the mullions and everything else going on, but also the connection. We don't want bolts and stuff interfering with the window. You don't want to see all that kind of ugliness. So looking at a detail that either kind of slices up through like a mortise and tenon, or a little, can you route around the edges to have a saddle? What is the effect on the cantilever and so forth? So really trying to pay attention to those details and making sure that we can make that work structurally so that everything just blends well in terms of the architectural goals that Chris had for the project.
And Chris, one of the goals for this project was large wooden beams, right? Not steel, but large wooden.
Yeah, absolutely. And those beams that you see there, well, there's two things going on. One is the rafter beams ended up being structural select lumber, which doesn't get used a whole lot. So that's kind of a very high-end, well-engineered lumber grade. And then in the middle there, we needed a beam that was going to span about 60 feet across that great room. So I'm sure Brian was having nightmares over that, but you can see the steel beam that's running down the ridge. We eventually decided on, there's no way to do that outside of steel. So we put in a steel beam and wrapped it in wood, and the finished result, you can't even tell the difference really. But
yeah, it's kind of funny. We looking at spans like that, and the result is you want something that looks warm and pleasant, and you try to do it out of wood, and it becomes this enormous giant beam that looks kind of silly. It's just so big, it overtakes the room. And so you're looking at going to steel. And, one of the things that I encounter a lot in residential is steel versus wood and trying to have the economics work. And sometimes just, if you just think about Carl there, you need a crane to lift this in place.
Yep.
Well, the beam that you would have, the equivalent wood beam, probably weighs as much or more than that steel beam. I mean, just to lift it in place. So while sometimes the steel may seem like it might be more expensive, and sometimes it very much is, other times it really makes a lot more sense, both from a cost standpoint as well as just a constructability standpoint.
And so that was back on Carl to hoist that thing up there and make sure it laid in there correctly, I assume, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so, and you're also thinking about a beam of this span, it's going to deflect. You put it up there, it's got its own self weight. You start adding more things on there. So really thinking about the stiffness of the beam, when you're laying in all the other rafters and all the other finishes, how is that going to, again, deflect? How does that work with the other materials that are intersecting it? So all those are things that we think about when we're looking at the structure. Does it have the strength, but also does it have the stiffness to accomplish what you're trying to do from an architectural perspective?
Yeah. How much will a beam like this deflect typically? Well, I mean, there's a massive steel beam that looks solid, but it's going to have some deflect. How much is that going to deflect?
You're looking at typically something like the length divided by 240. So the math is it's 60 feet long. You multiply that by 12 inches per foot, and then divide by 240, and that's kind of a target. You don't want to really exceed that for all the load that you've got on the beam. So there's different criteria like that you might look at, and it's a ratio. It's not an exact number. So the longer span that you get, the perception of that deflection gets minimized, even though it may be deflecting an inch or two.
And so, Chris, does that impact your selection of materials or anything up there? Is that enough of a problem for you guys to have to worry about sight lines, that kind of, or did you work down to the inch?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the detail that we just saw, the saddle brackets that are, so if you go back maybe one or two more, yeah, right there. So you can see there, we actually took each of those rafter beams and actually mortised in a steel bracket. And the reason we did that was Carl and I were discussing on site one day about, as big as these wood rafter beams are, they're going to have a tendency to want to twist. And how are we going to control that twisting? Because we have a very rigid frame, and those windows could potentially pop out if we start getting too much movement back and forth. And so we decided to actually mortise in a fully steel saddle to hold those beams in place. So that became part of the design discussion. Absolutely.
Got it. So yeah, so this is what you said, a 7,000 square foot house. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually a little more than that, a little over 8. And
you're detailing down literally down to the inch. It's amazing work.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So what might make the windows pop out? What kind of forces bring the twist to the house sometimes, besides just the weight of the house, obviously?
You want to talk about that, Brian?
Sure. I mean, you're looking at environmental conditions like wind or earthquake or snow, and so from a twisting perspective or an uplift, a lateral load, wind coming from the side, those are all things that you're looking at. Typically, somewhere between 25 and 35 pounds a square foot. For most houses is kind of a wind load that you might be looking at. So all things, once you get to the coast and you have hurricane force winds and things like that, these get a bit beefier. Here in the hill country, we're kind of lucky that we don't get a lot of earthquakes or none really. We don't have high winds, and we virtually have no snow apart from,
last week, 2 weeks ago.
Can I ask you about because of the fact that it is up top a cliff and overlooking, did you kind of factor up the wind consideration a little bit there?
There's a little bit of that, yeah. So you look at wind coming from one direction, and it's sort of like you've got a house that's 120 feet high, and then the other direction it's 20 feet high, and so there is a bit of differentiation in the force between one side of the house and just depending on which way the wind blows, literally. So yeah.
And one of the things you could see in that photo was that the soffits were actually made out of 2x material, meaning that they're a full, like a 2x stud versus what would traditionally be more of a trim material that would just be 3/4 inches thick. So that was one of the ways we helped with the wind loads.
And there's a little wind blowing right there.
Okay, so I just have to tell a quick story here. I know we're probably out of time, but I wish Carl were still here because this was just the greatest conversation in the whole project.
Just so you know, Carl is in the chat on the stage talking to people. So Carl's here at least in spirit.
Okay. Well, so good. Maybe Carl's listening then. But one of my favorite moments, and this was probably about a year's worth of design or more. So because Carl was part of the team and Brian was part of the team and everybody was involved early, often these conversations would come along and we'd have not an issue because we have a team. So we have challenges and then the team comes together to solve the challenge. So I get an email one day and it's from Carl and he's like, hey, the homeowner really wants to put a flagpole on the property. They want it to be really, really visible. And they're thinking about just putting it on top of the house. And immediately my brain went to, oh my gosh, like we are going to build this $7 million home and put a flagpole on top of it. And so I came up with all these great ideas of how not to put a flagpole on the house. Long story short, what ended up being true is Carl was just playing a prank on me. In the meantime, had spent hours gathering images of flagpoles on cars, flagpoles on other houses, flagpoles on everywhere a flagpole should not be. And I was going to send those images and say, maybe this isn't appropriate. But anyway, it was just a prank from Carl, which I thought was hysterical. And I didn't even know about it until a week later. I was on site talking to him and he's like, oh yeah, that was just a joke. So thanks for that, Carl. I still have nightmares. But we did get the flagpole on site in an appropriate location, and you can see it obviously. So
good. So yeah, this is it's an incredible home. It's like you said, the owners are immensely private people. It is way out of town here, so we couldn't get to walk through it today. But great detail. Thank you so much. Voltaire LLC with Carl Builder and Backbeat, Brian Johnson here as a structural engineer, and Chris Davenport, J. Christopher Architecture, sponsoring this year's tour. We're so grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. Your support and your team has been wonderful for the last, we've been working with this for 2 months now. And you did amazing work here. Amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Really, really great home. And to know and to see, that it started as a fire pit on a cliff.
Yeah.
That is, and then now this stands there. And, since there is no 3D model to walk through, we'll compile a photo gallery so that people can kind of look through photos on their own. But stuff, photos like this, just talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. I mean, really absolutely stunningly beautiful. And what a great example of collaborative effort to take literally nothing and build something amazing.
Thank you so much.
Really great. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. I know we went a little bit over, but we're going to take about an hour or 58-minute break now. We will be back at the top of the hour with our 2 afternoon segments for day 1. Thank you, Chris and Brian and Carl. I know you're watching, and shout out for J. Christopher Architecture for being one of our sponsors on the tour this year, and for sticking with us or for joining us for the first time this year, but also doing it in this new format, the virtual format. And I can't wait to show one of your works in person, hopefully next year.
Sounds good. Happy to do that.
All right, everybody. We'll see you back in about an hour. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.